I am the Domestic Policy Analyst for the Episcopal Church. I will be serving as your moderator today. After nearly 3 years of debate, Congress finally passed a farm bill last month. Our webinar will explore some key elements of this farm bill, including cuts to the SNAP program, whether you and your congregation can use faith advocacy to prevent and mitigate the nutrition cuts, and other big legislative changes embedded in this farm bill. We also will address ways that you can continue your advocacy work for related programs that serve vulnerable communities. I want to make sure that you know that we will be recording this webinar, and it will be available in recorded form for you to watch and share afterward. We will email you this webinar after we finish, and you can also find it posted where you signed up for the webinar at rac.org/call. Also, if you have questions throughout the webinar, please do not hesitate to type them into the question box, and we will do our best to answer them throughout our time together today. But before we begin, let us start with prayer. I am now joined by Reverend Brian Adams, the Minister for Economic Justice at the Disciple Center for Public Witness, and a pastor at Mount Rainier Christian Church in Maryland. Reverend Brian, will you lead us in an opening prayer, please?
Let us pray. God of the hungry and all who seek to serve the hungry, we praise you for your provident care for each of us and for all of those who are hungry today. We praise you for your work in us, leading us to this ministry, and we thank you for our fellow servants that are on this call and for our fellowship together. We have been going through difficult times in our country, in our economy, and many people going hungry, and in our hard work and advocacy to feed the hungry that is not always rewarded by maybe the results that we desire. But by your mercy, Lord, we give you praise that we are able to have SNAP benefits for many people in our country to help feed those who are in need. But because of the sin of our world, still many people that are hungry are being left out. Pray, Lord, that you will bless us in our conversation today, that we will hear your word be spoken through the words of others, and that we will persevere in faithfulness as we wander through the wilderness, that we will receive wisdom today about which direction to go to find bread to feed your people. In the name of the Most High Lord, we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Brian. All right, now it is time to introduce our fantastic speakers. Our first speaker today is Christine Melendez-Ashley, and she is a domestic policy analyst at Bread for the World, a collective Christian voice urging our nation's decision makers to end hunger at home and abroad. Christine joined Bread for the World in July 2009 and provides organizational leadership on nutrition assistance and child nutrition issues affecting hungry and poor people in the United States by developing and implementing policy and legislative strategy. She previously worked on Capitol Hill as a legislative staff assistant and systems administrator for Representative J. Randy Forbes. Christine received a BA in political science from Wheaton College. Ellen Vollinger is a legal director for Research and Action Center, for the Food Research and Action Center, or FRAC, and she will be our second speaker today. Ellen has responsibility for directing FRAC's advocacy on behalf of the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. Ellen has led FRAC's efforts to bolster SNAP, particularly to serve working families, legal immigrants, and victims of disasters. She has worked with administrators, elected officials, industry representatives, and nonprofit partners on strategies to provide a more accessible and effective nutrition assistance safety net. Ellen serves on the Government Payments Council. Her prior positions include serving as director of the nonprofit National Committee for Full Employment, as well as a practicing attorney with the Washington, D.C. law firm of Ross, Dixon, and Mosbach. Ellen has a BA in American Studies from Smith College, an MASS in Legislative Affairs from George Washington University, and a JD magna cum laude from the American University's Washington College of Law. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and without further ado, here is Christine.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here to talk about a little bit more about the Farm Bill. So thank you so much for joining us. This webinar is really, we see as a follow-up to a lot of the work that we were all involved in over the last year, including a few other DHN webinars that brought us together to talk about the Farm Bill. And so now that we have a bill, we just kind of want to talk, I'll be talking a little bit about kind of what happened, the basics of what was in the Farm Bill before I go ahead and turn it over to Ellen, who I know you really want to hear from about more of the specifics about how this is going to be implemented and how it'll be impacting particularly SNAP recipients across the country. So like Jay said, after what feels like forever, it was only about 3 years of working on the bill, Congress passed it last month. If you go to the next slide here, we had a 2012, and then we said, never mind, scratch that, 2013, never mind, scratch that, 2014 Farm Bill, and that's what we ended up with. And if we go to the next slide here, this is, the Farm Bill is a huge piece of legislation. It covers a lot of different varying policy areas, all related to food, and really what our focus is going to be on today is more so the nutrition title that really impacts SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which a lot of folks commonly refer to as food stamps. So that's where the focus of our comments will be today. So here's a little recap of what happened. If you'll remember, the House and Senate both passed Farm Bills last year that looked very, very different. The Senate bill included about $4 billion in cuts to SNAP and included a couple, at least one provision that we weren't too happy to see that would have banned ex-offenders of certain violent crimes from ever being able to receive SNAP benefits, and would have also impacted their families. And so we would have seen a reduction in SNAP benefits by about $90 a month for 450,000 households because of a change to a heat-and-eat policy, which Ellen is going to talk a little bit more in depth about in her presentation. So we were really upset to see the Senate bill. We were even more upset to see what the House did to nutrition programs. The House bill first, the bill cut about $20 billion, then cut $40 billion in SNAP, and it also included some really harmful provisions that would have devastated a lot of SNAP families. The $39 billion in cuts would have changed income eligibility and asset tests for the program. The bill would have included much harsher work requirements for people, even in times when unemployment is high and it's hard to find a job. It had work requirements that would have applied even to families with small children. It included a lifetime ban on ex-offenders. It had drug testing requirements. Anything bad that you could possibly think of to do to the SNAP program was in this bill. And all of those policy changes would have had some really devastating consequences. Just a small impact there, if you're looking at the webinar online, just some of those policy changes would have kicked almost 4 million people off the program just through eligibility changes. About over 200,000 children would lose free school meals because of those changes, and SNAP benefits would have been reduced by those $90 a month for about 850,000 households. So we had these two very different, very upsetting bills, and Congress had to come together, the House and Senate. They appointed a conference committee to negotiate out the differences. And in about December and January, we started hearing rumors of what a deal would look like. And as soon as the deal was released in January, it moved very quickly. So what was actually in the deal? If we go to the next slide here, the Farm Bill, like I said, is a huge piece of legislation. So there was a lot of different pieces coming together, not just on nutrition. We had heard rumors of what the nutrition title would look like well before we saw what the final deal would be. But the final deal ended up being about a total savings of $24 billion. About 8.5 of those billion came from SNAP. And the rest of the savings came from changes to the commodity and conservation titles and some other changes in the much larger piece there were some other smaller changes in the nutrition title that I think Ellen's going to mention. Some good, some not so great, and really the SNAP cuts are really were really devastating for us. We as advocates had been pushing for no cuts to the program, and to end up with a bill that had a reduction in benefits on top of benefits being already cut at the end of last year was extremely disappointing. But I'm an optimist. I work for Bread for the World. We're a faith-based organization, so we have to try to find some positive. And I think that the big positive and the big good news in all of this that happened was that your advocacy efforts made a difference. It's really hard to try to be, we weren't happy about the Farm Bill including a cut to SNAP, and we're working really hard to make sure that those cuts can be mitigated in some way. But, because of your advocacy efforts, this bill it looks very different than the House bill in particular. And that's really important. It's because of your efforts on the ground. I was doing a quick count at Bread for the World alone. Our members generated almost 40,000 emails to Congress, over 6,000 calls, and that's just one organization. I'm sure that there were plenty more emails and calls going up to the Hill, and that doesn't even account for all of the media work done with letters to the editors, all of the meetings had in districts here in D.C. All of those advocacy efforts mattered and made a difference. And because of that, there was a lot of things that were not included in the final deal that could have been. And so all of these things here, changes in eligibility for the program, those harsh work requirements, the lifetime ban on ex-offenders, and drug testing requirements, these are all things that were virtually eliminated and won't have the devastating impacts that we had initially anticipated when we saw that the House and Senate were negotiating the bill. So none of this, like I said, could have happened without your advocacy efforts. So now what? USDA is working on implementing the thousands and thousands of pages of this Farm Bill, and nutrition is just one part of it. So there were a lot of puzzle pieces that went into this, and USDA certainly has their work cut out for them. So as we turn our eyes towards implementation and how these SNAP cuts are actually going to translate for families on the ground, I'm really excited to have Ellen talk to us about what that's going to mean. But we also remain vigilant and looking forward to what's ahead in Congress. This isn't the end for SNAP. Just because the Farm Bill's over, it doesn't mean that SNAP is safe. Your voices mattered, and they will continue to matter. And so our advocacy efforts are going to be even more critical moving forward this year as Congress works on a budget and as they continue to look for ways to reduce the deficit and make cuts in our budget. So this isn't the end for SNAP, but I'm sure you have a lot of questions about what this is going to look like on the ground, and so I will go ahead and turn it over to Ellen to kind of give us some more specifics about how she sees this playing out for families across the country.
Christine, thank you so much, and thank you to the Interreligious Working Group for having this webinar, but particularly for all the work that it has done and that the faith community collectively has done to raise up voices and make a difference on behalf of vulnerable people. It, as Christine has already said, it has made an enormous difference for the better. Next slide. In this part of the presentation, we just want to touch on what the context is for SNAP and hunger currently, just as a reminder so that we know going forward where we stand. What the big challenges are now based on those November 2013 SNAP cuts that have occurred and the Farm Bill provisions, particularly the SNAP benefit cuts that Christine referenced. And it'll look ahead both at USDA implementation, how they will be approaching that, and a very quick checklist that I put together on what I think some of the key advocacy points ahead will be. So next slide. There's a reason all of us are interested in SNAP, and it's because this country has such a serious problem about hunger. And that's just a reminder of one of the indicators, how many people say they've been having difficulty affording enough food for their family. Next slide. We know that SNAP is a strong program and can respond very effectively to hunger, and that it has enormous positive economic consequences. And just as a reminder, each SNAP federal dollar benefits produces more than $1.73 in the range of $1.73 to $1.79 of economic activity. Next slide. But we also know that SNAP has gaps. Nearly 1 in 5 eligible people is not getting SNAP benefits. And among the elderly, those that are missed are 3 in 5. We also know from the Institute of Medicine that SNAP benefits are not adequate. And it's very important, if we're going to have a healthy food and healthy economies agenda, to increase those SNAP allotments. From FRAC's point of view, we'd be very interested in seeing SNAP base its benefits on the low-cost food plan and make those more adequate going forward. Next slide. As Christine mentioned, SNAP cuts were implemented in November 2013. Those came as a result of ending the boost in benefits that was made under the Economic Recovery Act. What does that mean to a household? Well, for a household of 3, it means that they're getting $29 in SNAP benefits less every month. This slide has a link to some materials that can help mitigate that impact by helping households understand that they may be able to get more in SNAP food benefits if they are deducting some of their basic out-of-pocket costs for things like dependent care, families with high child care costs, or if they're elderly or families with disabilities, costs for excess medical deductions. Next slide. And then, of course, on top of the November cuts, we have what we refer to as the Farm Bill Heat and Eat cut. That's the $8.6 billion in SNAP benefit cuts. It cuts SNAP 10-year spending, mainly by setting a threshold payment of $20 in low-income home energy assistance program payments to trigger a SNAP Heat and Eat impact. By coordinating between SNAP and LIHEAP, families are able to get a higher utility deduction. Because of the limits in the Farm Bill, the Congressional Budget Office has projected that 850,000 households could lose $90 a month in SNAP benefits. And the hardest hit states are those that are listed on the slide. But the impact really is for all states, because this is an option. Even though some states have not taken it before, this option has been open to all states, and so there's going to be a limitation going forward on the flexibility for states to move on this. Next slide. Heat and Eat implementation matters, and your advocacy during this implementation period is going to matter. Thank you to so many in the faith community and the anti-hunger community generally who've worked with members of Congress to ask USDA to have an appropriate implementation of this provision so that, in fact, the disruption and loss of benefits would not be as great. States can continue to safeguard benefits for families if they're able to provide more than $20 in LIHEAP assistance. There's a USDA implementation memo out. This slide provides you a link to that memorandum. It explains the time frame going forward with respect to new applicants who are coming into SNAP offices, and the somewhat delayed time frame for those who are currently on the program if a state wants to roll this change out a little more slowly. For households that do not get a LIHEAP payment at all, states must take steps to make sure that they're able to take into account their actual utility expenses to see if that can help safeguard some benefits for them. Next slide. Very quickly, a number of states have already moved to use the new provision in the Farm Bill and to provide that more than $20 in LIHEAP payment to preserve benefits for those households. This is one of the most important developments at safeguarding and protecting against the harm to family food budgets that would have occurred if states had not stepped up and done what they're starting to do. And in these next 3 slides, you will see links to information about what's happened in Connecticut and New York and Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Montana, Oregon, Massachusetts. And in Maine, they're about to implement. Washington State is considering implementing, and there are news clips about consideration of implementing protections in D.C. and Vermont. That matters because it means that the approximately $90 a month in SNAP benefits that households in those states were projected to lose will in fact be maintained. The process ahead is still to unfold. There may be backlash. Some elected officials have already expressed some concerns about states going ahead and doing this. So it's going to continue to be very important for people in the faith and hunger communities and other allies to speak up and talk about why this implementation that states are doing is, according to law, it is what was anticipated in the Farm Bill. It is appropriate, and it's very important in terms of guarding against increased hunger at the state level. There will be more policy guidance coming from USDA. There's expected to be a series of memoranda with questions and answers, not only on this heat and eat provision, but other Farm Bill provisions, including those affecting SNAP. Further down the road, there'll be formal rulemaking, and it'll be very important to get public comments in about the appropriate way for various provisions to be implemented. The next 2 slides provide references to some of those additional items within the Farm Bill that affect SNAP and nutrition. You'll see section numbers that point you to the portion of the bill that are in there. One that the slide omits, but I would want to bring to your attention, is one that would be implementing some changes in SNAP employment and training and work-related activities that may provide some opportunities for some additional support services to SNAP households. That's section 4022. How these get implemented will matter, and there will be more information coming out, and these are things that I think it would be helpful to pay particular attention to in coming months. The next slide. FRAC's focus as we look ahead is really not about program provisions so much as it is about whether or not we're adequately addressing the hunger problem in the United States, and one of the most important ways to do that is to make sure that SNAP benefits are adequate. And so going forward, in addition to paying attention to Farm Bill implementation, we're focused on getting improvements in the SNAP benefits in general. Next slide. Many of you have already been working on implementation, and many of the things that we would suggest on the advocacy top 10 checklist are things that the faith community is very familiar with. And on many of these ways of approaching advocacy, the faith community has shown great leadership and often been the model for others to follow. I would just tick them off. Going forward, number 1, we think it's very important to thank SNAP champions, those who are standing up for SNAP families, SNAP households, and standing against hunger and doing something about it, including members of Congress who stood up, governors, other elected officials, editorial writers. Number 2, comment on USDA implementation and rulemaking. It's going to be very important to see what the policy guidance information is coming out, and as public input is requested, having the faith community contribute its voice to that would be important. Number 3, monitoring Hill oversight and action. Not only oversight on Farm Bill implementation, but action on some of the other legislative tracks that Christine referenced. Number 4, making the case for adequate SNAP benefits, both from the moral argument as well as the economic argument. And on that, the faith community has proven to be so effective a voice in doing that. Number 5, put a human face on poverty and hunger. Number 6, mount SNAP challenges, as many in the faith community have done so effectively in recent years. Number 7, getting the message out via regular and social media. Number 8, continuing to support outreach and application assistance for SNAP-eligible people. As I mentioned, too many eligible people are getting missed, and they're not getting the benefits to which they're entitled. Number 9, promoting those practices that help SNAP households claim deductions. If they can get more credit for what they're spending on child care or what they're spending on medical expenses, that may allow them to get a bigger food benefit in SNAP. And then finally, we'd encourage any of you to join with FRAC in supporting H.R. 2384, which is a bill that would base SNAP benefits on the low-cost food plan, which would be an improvement over the food plan, the very meager thrifty food plan on which those benefits are currently based. And we've given you a link to our fact sheet about those priorities. And then the last slide is just where you can get more information from FRAC. We very much learned from the faith community. We hope you'll share your information with us, and we're happy to continue to be a resource and a partner with you. And again, thank you so much for having us and for having this webinar today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ellen and Christine. We are now going to move into the question and answer discussion portion of this webinar. And so if you have any questions, whether you have them now or they arise throughout this Q&A time, please type them in the question box and send them our way, because we would love to be able to answer them for you. So we are going to start out with a few questions now. And I would love to have either you, Christine, or you, Ellen, answer this one. I heard the statistics that 1 out of 5 people who are eligible to be on SNAP are not necessarily on SNAP. How can we help people specifically to get signed up? What should we tell them to do? Where can we, in what ways can we increase that number of people on SNAP?
One of the most important ways, this is Ellen, one of the most important ways that's happening now are through what we call SNAP outreach plans, and checking in with your state, or you can check in with me at FRAC about whether your state has an outreach plan. There are materials that states make available. Many nonprofit organizations have leaflets and information that they can give to low-income people about their likely eligibility. But many of those projects also have workers who are trained to pre-screen an individual and take into account a little bit of information and then estimate whether or not they'd likely be eligible. And some of the more expert of those application assisters can help a household to assemble some of the documentation that they need, improving their eligibility. So getting people connected to outreach workers, people who can be application assisters and help them navigate through the process, is probably the most effective way. But some projects, you know, even if it's just giving a person a start as to where they can connect with an eligibility office, or with being able to start an application online, even that minimal information can help them down the line.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Shifting gears a little bit, this question I probably think is directed at Christine. If you wouldn't mind, if you could speak a bit more about the power of the faith community specifically and advocacy work around government programs that protect vulnerable communities. Can you talk a bit about how the faith community can be particularly effective in this field?
Sure. I mean, I think the faith voice is critically important in advocacy efforts, particularly in ending hunger and therefore in protecting SNAP. I think the faith voice really does bring some extra weight. When you're a member of a faith community, or you're a leader of a faith community, and you speak out to your members of Congress, they listen, or at least they should listen, because they know that you're there representing not just yourself, but a whole community of people behind you who are speaking with one voice from the kind of moral perspective to urge them to do the right thing. And so certainly, you know, the faith voice is very important in all of our work here in DC to end hunger.
Great. Thank you. Ellen, can you tell us a bit more about the breakdown between how each SNAP dollar translates to 173 to 179 dollars in economic activity? I'm a little bit confused about how that process works. Would you mind speaking a bit more about the specifics of that?
Sure. These numbers are based on some studies that economists have done. The $1.73 number is one that's associated with Moody's, and the $1.79 number is associated with some studies that researchers at USDA's Economic Research Service has done. They're in the very similar range, I think, because they both approach this from a similar point of view. They look at how SNAP dollars get spent. And one of the things we know about a SNAP household is they're poor, and when they get their SNAP benefits, they tend to spend them, they tend to spend all of them, and they tend to spend them fairly quickly. So it's money that moves into an economy very quickly. And where does it move? It moves at a food retail outlet, an authorized SNAP store. Typically, that's at a very large grocery store. Most of the benefits in the SNAP program are redeemed through the large supermarkets and large grocery stores. And as those dollars flip over in those stores, they're helping support the jobs in those stores. The jobs are the people who are stocking the shelves and who are manning the checkout lines. But we also know that the food that's in those stores came elsewhere in the economic chain or food chain, and that is from truckers who brought the food to the store and who took it from warehouses where the food was either processed or grown. And when you go to the very beginning of the chain, of that economic chain, and who benefits, that includes the farmers. So it's really the entire economic chain that benefits, and there is a boost to local economies when those dollars turn over. Unfortunately, we're seeing with SNAP cuts this week in New York City, we've seen reports in the New York Daily News and other media about the opposite impact that the SNAP cuts are having on those economies. And not only the loss of SNAP dollars in New York has affected low-income, needy people and their ability to have as a consistent and adequate diet as they need, but it's also hurt some of the stores in the New York City area and is leading to cutbacks in hours for workers in those stores. So the investment works in either direction. If there's a positive investment, then it's a very good economic stimulus story to have. And when benefits are cut, it not only drives up hunger, drives up demand at food pantries, but also takes that money out of the local economy and is a negative with respect to economic development.
Thank you. That is incredibly helpful to know. I appreciate that really thorough explanation. Here's another question. Either Ellen or Christine, feel free to take this. How do you think we can most effectively, one, mobilize our congregations, and two, organize our congregations from start to finish to engage in advocacy work around federal nutrition programs?
Well, I think this is Christine. I think there's lots of opportunities and organizations here in DC keeping track of what's happening and when the best time to really, act, make those calls and write those emails or those letters. And so I would definitely encourage congregations to look at, Bread for the World or look at FRAC or any of the other anti-hunger organizations working here in DC and to really, know when to act. But also we have, at least at Bread for the World, we have staff out in the field who are always happy to work with you about and talk to your congregations or help you know how to mobilize your congregation. And so if you visit our website, www.bread.org, we have a map on there in our contact us, and that'll show you kind of where we have staff across the country that you can get in touch with to find out more.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine. Here's a technical question. In states not affected by the LIHEAP cut, are these states already giving benefits of more than $20, or are they not giving LIHEAP benefits at all?
They're using their LIHEAP dollars, but they're not connecting them directly with SNAP for the most part. So there is an opportunity in states that have not had the Heat and Eat model to go ahead and use the model that the heat need states do. And it would be very helpful if some of the states looked at how they're currently using their LIHEAP dollars and thought about ways to better coordinate between SNAP and LIHEAP.
All right, thank you very much. And I think we have time for one more question. And this question deals with looking ahead to the future. If you foresee, as you think about the SNAP program in the years to come, how do you foresee lawmakers seeking to change or reform the program in the coming decade or two?
Well, you know, Christine noted that she's an optimist. I think I put myself in that camp as well from FRAC. But it's so critically important to have voices that speak up for hungry people, because the future could go in two very different directions. There are still voices that are calling for cutting back on SNAP, not providing as much assistance to hungry people. And yet we know from studies how inadequate SNAP benefits are, and we know that there are many people who are hungry, not just because FRAC reports it, but because that's reported by official USDA Census Bureau figures, that we have a very major hunger problem in America, and one would hope that in the future the country would step up and provide a more adequate response to hunger, and that it would have a SNAP program where benefits reached all those who need them, and in fact provided the proper dose of the medicine. We often listen to Dr. Deborah Frank, a pediatrician from Boston, who says that SNAP is the right medicine, but the dose currently is too small. But it could go in either direction, and that's why your voices matter so much.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Ellen. I agree. I really hope that it does move in a more popular in that better direction. You know, looking back at kind of some SNAP history, I think helps me think about what the future of SNAP might look like. And you know, the program's been around for almost 50 years now, and it's gone through very, very many different iterations, but with sometimes with stronger support and sometimes with less support. And I'm really hopeful that we'll get through, you know, we've gotten through these last 3 years, and that we'll get through these next years of really tight budgets and hard economic times, and that we'll be able to move on to, you know, because of our advocacy, I'm hopeful that we will be able to move towards the program that is much better than it is now, where the benefit adequacy is much better, as Ellen stated. So I would have to agree with her on that one.
Thank you very much. We are just about out of time, and I want to make sure that if you, Ellen, or if you, Christine, have anything to add, please go ahead now.
I guess this is Christine. I would just say, you know, keep up the great work, and if you have any other follow-up questions that you couldn't think of during our webinar, you know, Ellen, I know I'm always happy to answer them. I'm sure Ellen would be as well. I think our email addresses are all listed there on the final slide, so please don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you, Ellen and Christine. We really appreciate you being with us today, and I think this pretty much wraps it up for the day, so feel free to contact us if you have further questions, and remember that we are going to email you this webinar so you can watch it and share it. We hope you will do both. And you can also access it at rac.org/call, where you registered for this webinar. Thanks again for your time this afternoon, and I hope you all have a great week. Bye now.